Well, hello everybody and welcome to Jeff's Baking Blog. Today I'm going to make some individual Christmas cakes. So I had this idea for an individual Christmas cake, and I then thought it would actually be a very good idea in the current climate where everything's so expensive with food prices and such like, that if people who live alone have friends who also live alone, maybe one of them could bake a series of individual cakes like this and just share them among friends. But whatever the reason, I think they would be very good given as gifts. Now, traditionally with a Christmas cake you would have some marzipan on the top and then some royal icing, or some people use fondant icing, and you can certainly do that with this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some brown butter icing, so just a simple icing that can be poured onto it and allowed to dribble a little bit down the sides of the cake. It should be quite nice actually. So it's not a difficult recipe and it doesn't even take too long. A lot of Christmas cakes take an awful long time to bake, but because these are small ones, they will bake quite quickly. Now, I should talk about the pan. I have here a small cake tin, so these have got fairly straight sides and they're not too deep, but they're smaller than a muffin tin. Now you could, if you don't have one of these, you could use a muffin tin and that would be fine. I'm also putting these little muffin cases in my tin and they fit in there, and the purpose of that is simply so that the cakes are easy to take out. I will discard the papers once the cakes have baked, but if you don't have these cases you can certainly grease a muffin tin or this type of tin and then flour the insides and maybe put some parchment paper on the bottom so that it doesn't stick on the bottom. That would work quite well. So I start off by preheating my oven to 170 degrees Celsius, 150 Celsius with a fan, 325 Fahrenheit, and that's ready for the batter. So I'll go on to the ingredients. And for this I have 150 grams, based on scooping packed flour into a 250 milliliter cup, of self-raising flour. Now if you don't have self-raising flour, you can use the same amount of plain flour but add into it 2 teaspoons of baking powder and stir it around thoroughly to mix it in, and that will make an equivalent to the self-raising flour. Then I have 100 grams, half a cup of dark brown sugar. I have 100 grams of currants, and that is 3/4 of a cup, and I have soaked those in some hot water and then I've drained the water off and dried them off a little bit. And I've done the same with 100 grams, which is 2/3 of a cup of sultanas. I have 50 grams, 1/4 of a cup of glacé cherries, which I have chopped into 4 pieces each. I have 30 grams, 1/4 of a cup of chopped mixed peel. I have 2 large eggs, which I have beaten together, and just for information, the weight of those eggs is 122 grams out of the shell, and that's for people who have medium eggs rather than large eggs. They can actually add a little bit extra so that the out of the shell weight is 120 or so grams. And the 2 large eggs would be extra large in the USA. I have 20 grams each of black treacle and golden syrup, that's 1 tablespoon each. 30 millilitres, 2 tablespoons of milk. I have 150 grams, 10 tablespoons plus 2 teaspoons of softened unsalted butter. And then I have 5 grams, 1.5 teaspoons of mixed spice. And that's everything that's going to go into the cake, except that optionally I have some cherry brandy here, and I'm going to make a few holes in the top of each of the cakes and just brush a little bit of the cherry brandy on so that it can soak in, just to make it richer, but that's entirely optional. And then for the brown butter icing, I have 90 grams of butter, and that's 6.5 tablespoons. I have 130 grams, 1 cup of icing sugar, and 30 millilitres, 2 tablespoons of milk. I also have here about a tablespoon of flour, and I'm going to use that to toss the fruit in before I put it into the cake. So that's all the ingredients, and the first thing we need to do is to make the cake batter. And I'm going to start that process off by creaming together the butter with my sugar and the black treacle and the golden syrup. And I'm going to beat that all until it's a sort of nice and fluffy, and it has gone paler than it otherwise will be when we start. So I'll cream these together for 3 or 4 minutes probably. So that's quite good like that, and I'm going to add my egg in, and I'm going to add it in a little bit at a time, whisking all the time until it's fully incorporated. So I've got that mixed in, and I did scrape the bowl down a couple of times to make sure that I got everything incorporated. So the next thing I'm going to do is to put my flour in. And I'm going to give it a mix around on a low speed, and then I'll use the spatula to finish folding it in. So that's almost folded in now, and it's ready to receive the fruit. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put my flour that I had into a bowl, and I'm going to tip first of all the cherries, which are very, very sticky, into the flour, and just mix those around. The purpose of this is really to keep the pieces of cherry separate from each other in the batter, so they don't all clump into a single cake or something like that. And I'll add the peel in as well, and the other two can also go in, but they won't clump together because I've soaked those and they're all nice and separate. I'll just toss them around to get them distributed a little bit. And then I'm going to simply fold those into the cake batter. And you may have noticed that I didn't put my mixed spice in, which I should have mixed in with the flour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in with my milk and stir it around. It will work just fine. Ideally you would put this mixed spice in at the same time as you put the flour in, but because I have the milk to add to loosen the batter a little bit, that will work just fine. So I'm going to pour that over, and I'm going to fold that in until that's fully distributed. And that's good like that. So then the next thing to do is to put that into our cake pan, and my estimates tell me that I need to put about 70 grams into each one. So I'm going to weigh mine, but you can do it by eye if you wish to. I'm simply going to take 70 grams at a time and put it into the prepared paper. And so I've filled mine probably with about 72 grams in each one, in fact, and I'm now going to put that into the oven, and I'm going to bake the cakes for 25 minutes. They should rise up a little bit, and they should be firm to the touch, and at that stage I'll take them out of the oven, leave them for a couple of minutes in the pan, then transfer them to the wire rack, and when they've cooled completely I take the papers off as well, and I'll come back and show you those, and we'll make the icing to go on the top. I baked the individual Christmas cakes for 25 minutes and tested them with a skewer, which came out clean. So I've now allowed them to cool down, and I have them on a wire rack, and I've turned them upside down, and that's because that gives them a flatter surface, and because they have a slight slope on them, the icing when I put it on will hopefully just gently roll down just a little bit. So what I'm going to do, and as I said, this is optional, I'm just going to make a few holes in the top as they are now, and I will also do the underside as well. Try not to pull the fruit out with my skewer. Like that. And I'm going to simply brush some cherry brandy, and I mentioned this is optional, but I'm just going to brush a little bit over them. Then I'm going to turn them over and do them on the other side as well. Let that soak in. That's just going to give additional flavour, but it is optional. I mentioned you don't have to do that. They will taste very, very good without. And so with the top and the bottom just brushed lightly with the cherry brandy, I'm going to set those to one side and make the brown butter icing. And the first thing we have to do is to brown the butter. So I'm going to put that into a saucepan. That's my 90 grams of butter, and I'm going to start to melt that, and I'm going to heat it up fairly gently until it starts to froth and the little white bits of milk solid come to the surface, and as the water in the butter evaporates, the butter should turn a brown colour. You may get a few little black flecks in the bottom, which is why I'm using a pan, and I can see those on the bottom rather than a dark based pan. And then once the butter has turned a golden brown colour, that will be ready to use, and I will strain that off through a strainer to get rid of any black flecks that may appear. And I don't want to heat it too vigorously, because that will simply burn the butter rather quickly, and we don't want to do that. So my butter has now browned, and you don't want to go too far because it will actually start to burn. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour that through a strainer into my bowl. So with my brown butter strained, I'm sifting my icing sugar into it, because icing sugar tends to clump and we don't want lumps in it. And then I'm going to stir that icing sugar into the butter. And I have my 2 tablespoons of milk, which I may not need all of. I'll need some of it. That's used to work the icing into the consistency that we need. And as you can see, that's not quite the right consistency, so I'm going to pour a little bit of the milk in. Whoops. And I'll try not to make too much mess. And that consistency is almost what I want, but I think I've put slightly too much milk in, So I'm going to add in a teaspoon of icing sugar and see if that thickens it a little bit. So I think that's just about good enough for what I want. You can have it as thick or as thin as you want, but I'm simply going to take some on a spoon and put it on to the top. And I'm just going to leave those just as they are, like that, for that icing just to set up. It's going to stay soft, but the exterior will just firm up nicely and form, it's not a skin, but it will just set on the exterior. And then once that has happened, I'll come back and we'll have a taste of one. I left the cakes with the icing on just to set up for sort of 5 or 10 minutes, and I've cut one. So I'll just show you the inside of the one that I've just cut, like that. Looks very good. So I'll have a taste of it. It's very, very good. It's got the fruitiness. I can taste the mixed spice as well, and the sweetness from the slightly caramel flavoured icing. And I get just the slightest hit of my cherry brandy. So I think these are ideal as individual little cakes. They could be given as gifts if that you put them in a little box. You could share them with neighbours as well if you want to. So that's going to be it for this recipe. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, please give me the thumbs up below and click to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the top right hand corner of the screen there will be an eye that you can click on, and that will take you to a link for the recipe, and I'll put a link in the video as well, and I'll be back with another recipe in the very near future. So until then, happy baking.